What is up, fellow thermonuclear AFers? I am Dan Favali coming at you with yet another 2023-2024 NBA team look ahead. We're on to the Miami Heat, and that means I get to speak with Allana Tachauer, who has agreed to come out of podcasting retirement specifically for this episode. So this should be awesome, and we should all thank her very much for agreeing to come on. Allana, how the heck are you doing?
You're going to get me very unfiltered and unhinged, I think. Didn't sleep great. It's a Monday. I have a meeting right after this. So I am excited to be here, though. And the Heat have been fun so far. 3 preseason games in, I think. So looking good.
I thought you were going to say fun relative to the off-season chatter and everything. And I was like, fun is certainly a word to describe what had
Well,
happened. We should probably begin there, though, the Damian Lillard stuff. But I wanted to actually ask you about the finals run real quick, because on this podcast, we spent way too long trying to figure out what the hell was going on. What was the secret sauce of that just turnaround? They were a team that was weird in the regular season, where it was the defense was great and the offense ticked up, but the defense pulled back. There was injuries, but they make it to the finals. What went into that? What was the biggest thing that just changed for them?
honestly, I've said this for seasons. The only constant about this team is their inconsistency, and it used to drive me nuts, but at this point I'm just kind of leaning into it. I just think anything is possible with them. And obviously, I mean, Jimmy's just built for this, and it's not to say that they don't care about the regular season. I just think there's another level of play when it comes to the playoffs. I think everyone was clicking at that point. And honestly, let's be real, the national media, it's not even that they hate us. It's like we don't exist. And I think that makes the players want to do more and better for not only obviously the fans, but the organization and themselves. So it was one heck of a run. Honestly, that was probably in recent times my favorite run to see, just because everyone was doubting. And it really, I think up until the end, I don't really think anyone really knew what happened. I know there are people out there who said, Denver was a lock to begin with, but maybe it's just bias. I just never felt that way. I think that we had it from the get, and we could have gone all the way. But yeah, that was a lot of fun, and this team always is full of surprises.
What was probably not surprising, though, is their link to Damian Lillard over the offseason, because they tend to get linked to any stars that become available, and especially stars that name them as the only team that they would like to go to. I want to start here very quickly, not because I don't want to belabor too much time on this, but what did you make of just the discourse surrounding the negotiations and the leaks and the pivoting and the positing coming from both sides, or I guess all 8 sides when you factor in Damian Lillard, his camp, the Miami media, the Portland media, the teams themselves?
This was the first time that I actually bought into it a little bit. I usually, when we're linked to someone, I mean, how many times have we talked about Bradley Beal? It's been 5, 6 summers. I don't really tend to believe a lot of what's out there. And not only that, a lot of the time I feel like we're almost doing the team a disservice when we are counting on these huge names to come, as if, without them, we can't get anywhere. But Dame was the first time and the first situation that I actually thought it may happen, primarily just because, we were hearing from him and his camp itself. I am still a little bit unsure as to what happened. I know that there's reports on both sides, saying that the Heat were unwilling to give what was reported. And then I've also heard that the Heat, did far and beyond what they said. I'm ready to move on from it. I'm sure Dame is ready to move on from it. I don't love that they keep posting pictures of him in Milwaukee looking, upset or like he's not happy. It's just, can we not do that? Give the man a break. I don't know. The whole thing was crazy. I don't understand kind of how we got so far away from him coming here, but it is what it is at this point. I don't know really what to believe.
Despite the body language doctors and what they may say, I do think he's actually pretty stoked to be in Milwaukee. And so,
judging from photos last night, yeah, if we're really going to go into every single photo and every single moment with his family.
I think the stuff that actually matters to the negotiations is twofold. And it's first, the players that left. When you look at Gabe, Vincent, Max Strus, do you think the Heat kind of acted like a team this offseason that thought they were going to get Damian Lillard when you see that those two guys just sort of left? Or do you believe that they always would have played it super tight when it came to what those guys cost, or just maybe from a distance, do you think that the media is overvaluing what they meant to that team?
It's hard for me to believe that Pat Riley had tunnel vision to the point of not even entertaining the idea that Dame might not come here. I'm not saying that, he wasn't willing to do whatever it took, or that he wasn't, making the proper strides in order to make that happen. But I don't know, the narrative of him, and just the front office in general, not doing what they needed to do in case, or not having a plan B, to me, it just doesn't seem realistic. I, really liked both Gabe and Max, and I think that they added a lot to the team in that particular run. But let's not forget that in the beginning of the season, Heat fans themselves were not very high on them, and they didn't think that they would be relied upon, or that they would be, X factors. I'm sad to see them go, but I think it's being a little bit overstated at this point.
Is there a chance that there's any lingering awkwardness between the franchise and not just Tyler Herro, but also Kyle Lowry, because those dudes spent a ton of time in hypothetical trades over the offseason?
It's always interesting because players they're such individuals that you never know how they're going to react. I think we saw it, 2-3 seasons ago. I'm losing track of time. But when Duncan was mentioned in a bunch of trade stories, during free agency and even during the trade deadline, I don't think he took it very well. I think it affected his play. I obviously don't know the guy personally, but Tyler does not seem like he's really been shaken. I think if anything, it kind of motivated him to work harder this summer. I know certain things have been coming out, from conversations with Tyler and certain people on Twitter and in the media, that he wanted to stay. And I do believe that. Kyle's a different story. I love Kyle still. I know a lot of Heat fans have kind of turned on him. I think that I don't know how much I believe that he really thought he was going to go. I'm not trying to put too much emphasis on the fact that, him and Jimmy are friends, but at the end of the day, it is kind of Jimmy's team. And I think if Jimmy wanted him to stay, he was going to stick around. I don't really read into him saying he thinks he's going to be the starting point guard, or he expects to. What do you want a player of his caliber to say? I don't know where that narrative came from. I think it would have been crazy for him to say, I'm happy coming off the bench, or we'll see what happens. So I hope it didn't affect either of them. So far, it doesn't look like it has affected Tyler. I think that his confidence is up. I think he's really stepping into the role. But it is preseason, so it's a little bit too early to tell.
The Tyler Herro stuff is fascinating when you look at what he means to this team, because I do think I did not side with the Miami media or the Miami side of things on a lot of this. I do believe that the Tyler Herro discourse just veered so far away from reality at certain points. A lot of the times, and we've seen it with other players, when they sign that second contract before it even kicks in, their value is just inherently diminished. And I think that's kind of happened with him. And it definitely did not help that they made a finals run without him, basically. Like, that certainly didn't help his case. And yes, there's stuff to get into. Well, if the Blazers couldn't find enough value with Tyler Herro, like secondary value, to make that trade with the Heat, they got Jrue Holiday, who is just an objectively better player because he's a two-way player than Tyler Herro right now. And so he's going to mean more probably to a team's championship hopes. But the Blazers didn't need him. They had a ton of guards. And I actually think Tyler Herro made strides last season when you look at him specifically as a passer. What are you watching most closely, though, about his, like, an area of his development, or just how he plays this season? Like, what do you think is most important? Is it, I think a lot of people focus on maybe some of the off-ball stuff offensively, but you look at this roster, and my other question to you was, do you expect us to see like more units where he is effectively kind of the lead guard when Jimmy Butler's off the court?
Yeah, I think for me, it's twofold. The first is just his basketball IQ. I think that Jimmy has a way of rubbing off on players, especially players who he kind of takes under his wing. And it's not to say, that he's ignoring other guys. But I think that it became clear kind of that Tyler and Jimmy were working, towards having not only off the court, but on court chemistry as well. And I think Tyler, and again, preseason is such a small sample size, but I already see growth in that way where you can tell he's thinking ahead, and not just for himself, I think for the rest of the team while he's on the floor with them. I think the other thing is, he has been injury prone, and some of that might just be the way he is, but some of it is his style of play. And I think that hopefully he's been working with, either his own trainers or kind of the Heat training staff to kind of figure out a way for him to stay healthier. Because I think that if he starts protecting his body a little bit, you know, and not necessarily by resting, but just kind of playing differently, it'll go a long way. Not only, you know, obviously to keep him on the floor and keep him actually active, but also to make him a little bit more well-rounded.
It does feel like his just ability to hit off the dribble threes or pull up threes is perennially underrated. I was looking, and here's every player who made as many pull up threes as him last year on the same or better efficiency, which was 36.9% on off the dribble threes, which is a big deal. Steph, Tyrese Halliburton, James Harden, Kyrie, Dame, Jamal Murray, and Donovan Mitchell. That is it. And then there's Tyler Herro. And so
That's crazy.
I don't think he's any of those players, but that skill set matters. I think especially or particularly in a playoff setting. You can get into his defensive limitations, but to have someone who's able to do that in your offense, it's a pretty big deal. I would say, especially with the departure of Max Strus now as well.
Yeah, I think that, and I think the fact that, you know, he is younger and he has fresh legs under him is really important, especially in a playoff situation, because, you know, Jimmy, Kyle, even Bam, he's not old by any means, but he's not as kind of springy as Tyler is. And I think that is super important, and it is underrated. I don't know. It's so weird because I thought by now kind of the narrative on him would change. I think that in the beginning, a lot of people judged him for kind of his flashiness and his confidence. Then to your point, I think his contract didn't help. But at this point, I'm not really sure what it is about him that's so polarizing.
I honestly agree that maybe it's his fashion sense, and maybe people are just drawn to that. I have no idea what makes him so polarizing on the court. What did you make of what they did with their actual offseason, the additions? You have Jay Rich coming back, you have Thomas Bryant, Kevin Love is back. Just sort of what did you make of those series of moves? And of those three, I think there's a clear answer, but is there one that just intrigues you or will do the most for this team?
I mean, anyone who knows me knows I love Joshy. Like I'm a diehard Jay Rich fan. I should not be admitting this, but I almost crashed my car on a highway when I found out the news, just because I was like on Twitter and all of a sudden this came through and I'm like swerving into someone else's lane. I'm super excited. I think that he obviously gets the Heat culture. He gets the Heat mentality. Both him and Bam being older and more mature in their games now is going to be huge. I'm so excited to see him with Tyler and Jimmy, honestly. But I think that K-Love coming back is underrated. I think I tweeted this the other night. He was just such an intelligent pickup to me, especially alongside UD now leaving. I think we needed someone, and, you know, Kyle is somewhat this too, but we needed someone with a veteran presence who kind of can rally all the young guys. And then having an actual backup for Bam, and that's really no disrespect for the guys that came before him. I had no actual issue with any of the other guys, you know, whether it was the mechanic or Zeller, but just that is huge. And I think that it may also mentally help Bam out. You know, obviously the physicality that it took to be kind of our one and only for a while is obviously now kind of lifted off his shoulders. But I think that Bam, knowing that there is someone there to back him up and even maybe play alongside him, depending on the lineup, I think that's super exciting.
When you look at who they've brought in and now who they lost, like who are you more concerned about looking at the lineup, the way they're going to play leaving? Is it Gabe Vincent or Max Strus? Like who winds up being the bigger loss for them?
Honestly, that's tough. And it kind of depends on what Duncan does, which I know is just kind of a very basic answer at this point, but I just don't know what version of Duncan we're going to get. I think that Gabe really backed Kyle up well. I think not only kind of the X's and O's, but just the basketball IQ and the ability to read the floor. But obviously, you know, when Duncan was struggling, and if he continues to struggle, losing Max might hurt more. I really just think it depends on Duncan, and that is one that I'm very curious to see how that develops.
What got into Duncan Robinson during the post? Like, it wasn't just like he hit, like he was dribbling more than we've ever seen him before. Was just like, was this months in the making and I just missed it? But it was like, it wasn't even a renaissance. It was like a rebirth.
Yeah, I don't know if it's just this team is like built for the playoffs, and that's just like such a cop-out answer. And it's also not one that I love, because I'm someone who I don't like the whole rhetoric of the regular season doesn't matter, but I do think that everyone just switches into another gear. And let's face it, he really was, I mean, for a while they're the weakest link, and I think that he got sick of being that, and I don't think he wanted the responsibility of this team maybe not going as far as they could, you know, not that it would be his fault solely, but if it was the majority of on him not pulling his weight, I think he just stepped up.
Something that felt like it flew under the radar a little bit, and maybe it was because of how rickety their offense was at times, but Bam felt like he made real strides just as a scorer. What most impressed you or maybe even took you aback about the way he was able to add to his offensive game last year?
I mean, I think his midi game definitely improved, and it was not something that people necessarily expected. I know going into the year, a lot of people wanted him to kind of start adding more threes to his game, and it's not to say that I don't think he should pull up from there every once in a while, but I think making someone do something just because, you know, other big men in the league are doing that, if he's not going to be the guy for that, it's better that he focus on something else. I think in general, he's just more aggressive and more dominant on the floor, especially on the offensive end. And even so far this season, I've seen him look even more so. So if that continues, I think we'll be in a really good spot.
Yeah, his also just like to just go, like kind of an ISO, not a huge part of his game, but like his isolation possessions almost doubled per game from last year over the year before. And to have that type of option, and if you can improve the spacing around him on any given night, there's like, he might not be done hitting a next frontier as a scorer. I don't, the three stuff, it'd be nice. But I think at some point when someone's this deep into his career, you have to kind of accept that, this probably won't be a huge part of his game ever. And I think we're kind of at the point where it doesn't necessarily need to be for him to be a top tier offensive player and he was already a really good offensive player when you just look at the playmaking, the IQ, the ability to lead stuff from the full floor to the top of the floor.
Yeah, and I think that having an actual backup now will help with that too, in terms of just getting him the rest that he needs and not feeling like, if he comes out for an extra minute or two than he used to, that the entire offense will collapse. I think that his training, I said this on Twitter yesterday, it really does look like every single person on this roster put in work this offseason. And yeah, I mean, it should be a no-brainer, but the level kind of energy that they came out with, I think they're hungry. I don't think they're necessarily disappointed per se. Obviously, it would have been great to get that title, but I think that they're taking it as a proud moment and knowing that if they got that far with what they have and improving now this year already, I think with some pieces that they know that they can get as far, if not further again.
You have to forgive the long preamble on this, but they are so confusing to me in the sense that I don't know if they're built as constructed to meaningfully improve upon, I don't even want to say just the offense, but their two-way play, because you could say, all right, maybe Kyle Lowry, maybe Caleb Martin, maybe some of these guys have better shooting seasons, and they missed last year. That he had like one of the worst catch and shoot percentages in the league. It's like those are shots you could envision going down. But we also, what I thought was underplayed to their credit leading into the postseason, we saw kind of an uptick in how they were shooting. They were still relying a lot on just Tyler Herro's three-point volume and making, but the offense did fare better. And yet then the defense sort of fell apart. And so I'm just looking at this roster. Is there a path to where they are a two-way team, not just in the regular season, but when it matters most? Or is this still, no, they don't have to go out and do something right now, and they're probably not going to, but it's still just based off their link to Damian Lillard, based off the type of player we know they've been after over the past couple of years. Do they still sort of need a trade to optimize, or let's say reach the typical upper tier of contendership where it's not, oh shit, the Heat somehow made a finals run and no one was expecting them to?
Honestly, I feel like what's bigger than all of that is maybe, and I hate this term, but kind of rebranding themselves a little. I think that for a long time, the Heat kind of had these cornerstone themes to the types of guys that they were getting and the types of rosters that they were constructing. A lot of it was, very good offense and very reliant on the three ball. And it's not to say that some guys on the roster right now don't fit into that mold, but I just think that they need to kind of rethink what it is that they want their team identity to be and try to, first and foremost, fit the players they already have right now into whatever that is. But then, yeah, maybe looking at the trade deadline and thinking about, okay, we have this kind of rebrand or new identity. What gaps do we need to fill, and where can we fill the void? It's hard because the front office has been so stable with the same personnel, and I get that. And you have some guys who have been here for quite some time, like Bam, for example, and even J. Rich coming back. But I think at this point, it's more so looking at what we have now rather than to try and fit into this mold that we keep trying to come back to year after year. Especially because, honestly, we haven't gotten a lot of the bigger names that have been connected to us. And it is hard to know because the Heat are so tight-lipped how realistic that even was in the first place. But I think trying to focus more on where we are now as opposed to like what we could be is in my opinion, the way to go.
Do you have any early impressions of Jaime Jacquez Jr. and do you expect to see him get a chance on this team that, they have Jimmy Butler, they have Caleb Martin, but they need wings?
Yeah, I know that I've only seen 2 preseason games. I don't know if he played 2 or 3. I know he got injured a little bit, but he looked incredible, and I can already tell that he's learning from Jimmy, which I think is so important because beyond what you're actually capable of in terms of raw skill and talent, I think soaking up what's around you, especially from a player like Jimmy Butler, is super super important. So yeah, I'd be shocked if he didn't make the cut in quite a large way if he's obviously able to stay healthy. Like anything else, some of it will be like, dependent on who they're playing and kind of the rest of the guys around him. But I expect him to be a major part of this roster.
I think if he can keep the ball moving and hit just set threes right now, that might be enough to just throw him on the floor and say, you're not going to hurt us more defensively than he might even help you defensively. You're not going to hurt us more defensively than a Duncan Robinson, or if we decide to play K-Love next to Bam Adebayo. But it's always, I try to take a step back whenever I like youngsters on teams that have immediate expectations because it's, well, how much runway is Eric Spoelstra actually going to give him? Because the Heat might not care as much about the regular season as the average team, but like it still matters in terms of seeding and you're trying to win games. And so I'm very curious to see if he gets like a legitimate shot or if this is just sort of, even the buzz coming out of the draft was they view him as NBA ready. He's perfect for the Heat. Like this is someone who can help right away. You just have to take that with a grain of salt. And so I'm fascinated to see whether he gets plugged into their rotation in a meaningful way at all.
Yeah, it's interesting too to me because obviously I don't really know what's going on behind the scenes, but Spo does seem to kind of, once he has his favorites, he will kind of take more chances on them, I think, than other players, for better or worse. And I'm sure that all coaches in some way do this. But I also have a feeling that if Jimmy is pushing for it and he's kind of taking him under his wing, it will probably be harder to have Spo not at least give him a chance. And to be honest, why not in the beginning of the season? I obviously don't know how long he's going to be out with this injury. But now is kind of the time to try that out because, to your point, seeding will matter, but we're so early on, even, in the beginning of the season, that I think we should just let him kind of play and see how that shakes out.
I was not privy to a lot of it, but it seemed like Twitter was very high on Nikola Jovic over the offseason. Do you have any role expectations for him, or is he someone that probably won't factor too heavily into the rotation?
I mean, I think it's kind of the same thing. Why not just give him a shot right now? I think he had a great run this summer. Obviously, you have to factor in that style of play is different and it lends itself more to a certain type of player. But I think that, if he's coming out with that momentum, if he's coming out with the support, of not only the fans, but also the organization, I say just try everything right now and kind of reevaluate as the season goes.
We kind of touched upon this a little bit already, but looking at how the defense did suffer a little bit or a lot of it after we saw the offensive shift, do you have any lingering concerns about sort of that late season decline, or do you chalk a lot of it up to just injuries, availability, or just the time of the season even, or maybe their emphasis on really trying to juice the offense up so much?
I think it's a combination of everything. I honestly can't even keep straight what injuries we had when, just because it seemed like it was just on loop. But I do think that played into it. And I also just think that there was kind of a turning point in the season where it almost was like, okay, we're out of options and it's now or never. And I think that Spo, in a way, finally got out. And this is something I've criticized him for as much as I love him, but it kind of got out of that tunnel vision he had and was like, we're just going to try to revamp the offense instead of kind of relying so hard on what we know. But I definitely do think it was the time of year. It was a lot of games. It was a lot of injuries. So I'm not any more or less, I guess, concerned than I was last season. It's just kind of a matter of who steps up when. And again, as frustrating as it can be, it is kind of fun to never know what this team is going to do.
I tend to be a little bit higher on their defense, I think, because I tend to be higher on Caleb Martin's defense than the consensus, where a lot of people look at him as a gap filler and which he does. But like when you look at some of the one-on-one or general assignments he had to cover last year, those are caps lock defensive assignments, and he fared quite well for a lot of it. And so between having the option of him, Jimmy, Bam, you're going to get nights from Kyle Lowry where he looks good defensively. I guess when you get into, okay, like 5, and Josh Richardson just being there, just positionally solid still, is still going to defend. Now, when you get out of those 5, maybe there are some question marks, but I still believe that to me anyway, and maybe you feel differently, it still feels like the ceiling for them on defense is probably maybe not a lot, but measurably higher than it would be for them on offense as currently constructed.
Yeah, it just to me kind of depends which way they're going to try and lean and what kind of guys are zeroing in on for themselves this season. I think that sometimes players tend to, once they see something's really working for them in terms of improving, they almost not forget about the rest, but they don't really try to like own in their craft that much. So I am curious to see. And again, I think it's just, to me, it's so dependent on who we're playing night in and night out. We kind of turn this gear of whether we're going to, try to outscore the other team on three or whether we're just going to try and clamp them down. I'm mostly curious, to be honest, to see kind of what Bam is going to do on the defensive end, because I do think against certain other big men, he tends to struggle. And I've always been of the mindset that it's all kind of mental for him. And as soon as he gets that confidence and gets that kind of stability within himself to know that he can do what he needs to do, that it'll come. But I don't know if we're going to get there.
Can we run back the how many threes will Jimmy Butler hit this season segment from last year?
Sure. Will you remind me of where we were at?
We said it at 30. I said it at 36 and a half. Oh no, I said it at 44. We both went over. He hit 36 while missing some time. This year, I'm going to keep it around the same, but let's go with a more decisive win or loss, 44 and a half. So there can be no push. Are you taking the over or the under?
I was going to say he's going to hit he's going to go with 40. So I'll go the under.
I'm just going to say the over to differentiate. The amount of times he goes into the paint, and maybe it'll be different this season, there's just like 4 bodies below the free throw line. I'm like, you got to want to take threes at some point, right? And so he probably won't. I'm just going to hit the over because I'm going to be an optimistic in this department.
I mean, we're only really 4 apart anyway, so either way, it would be a win if Jimmy took either of the. I mean, as long as they're obviously going in. I do think too that Jimmy's really good about trying to kind of pick up the slack of what's going on. So I do think it'll obviously depend on what's happening with guys like Duncan, and if maybe Tyler can shoot it at a higher volume too.
The other thing, and that's like a cliche question, but it's just funny because he plays so dramatically different sometimes in the playoffs versus the regular season. And also, if there's a player that if you just said was the most likely to be like, he's kind of not taken a lot of threes the past few seasons, but he's decided I'm going to take a shit ton this year, it would just be him because he has that type of personality. But do you worry about like the aging curve at all with him as he's getting into his mid-30s and the load that he has had to carry now for a few years?
Not really. And if it were a lot of other players, my answer would be different. To me, he's only gotten better and kind of more athletic and more durable and just gone harder in these last few years. So I'm not really worried about it. And honestly, for him, just because of the type of guy he is, it's so much more like mind over matter, to the point where, not that I necessarily support this, but I feel like this man would run himself into the ground before he admitted that, maybe he's slipping or needs to take a step back.
My counterpoint would be is he wouldn't give up coffee for a year from him winning an NBA championship. So would he really run?
I don't know if I would either. I read that and I was like, I probably wouldn't, nor would I give up wine.
I guess he's at the point where it doesn't matter because he's made so much money. I would absolutely well, if you ask me if I had to give up caffeine just because I'm not a coffee drinker, yeah, that probably becomes a little bit more of a thinker. I know it's an impossible question to ask because we need to see them play the games this year, but everything when it comes like on the major moves that they've missed, or even some of the bigger ones that they've made, it has always happened. It has generally happened over the offseason. Do you think this team is prepared, though, given kind of the timeline they're on with Jimmy Butler specifically, that if something comes along, or if an opportunity in the sense of a player becomes available that fits during the regular season, that they would be prepared to make that consolidation or bigger swing that a lot of people have kind of been waiting on for a couple of years now? Or is this very much a team that is probably going to wait generally to recalibrate over the offseason?
It's hard because every time I think that we're at the point where, okay, we just kind of need to gut it out and go for it, they then turn a corner. And I'm almost wondering if, that's kind of what happens with the front office, of they have this plan of, we're willing to give up half the team to get one guy. And then all of a sudden they look like a completely different team. It also, to me, really matters on who it is. And I say that only because this is Jimmy's team. And if the fit with Jimmy in particular, whether that be mentally off the court, obviously on the court as well, is just not perfect, I don't think the front office is going to do it.
I think what also makes it difficult to make that call is how much we've actually seen them flip a switch when it comes to the postseason. And so what is the line for concern in the regular season where it's okay if they're on pace for 42, 43 victories? That's not really out of the ordinary. And so do you just trust them to, and look, it's a cliche. It's not scientific to say if they just flip this switch. We have years of evidence that it just happens. When you look at, they've been to 3 conference finals in the past 4 years. That doesn't happen on accident. And so I think it makes it tougher to make that call, but I also think it makes it easier to look at the trade market as a real means of improvement, because I don't think, even though maybe we might diverge on how high we are on this team's ceiling as presently constituted, I don't think it takes a caps lock megastar. It didn't need to be a Dame. It didn't need to be a Bradley Beal to be like, oh, the Heat look more like they fortified their contender stock. And so in a way, I don't know what the answer is, but I do think that they should be more open to it, because I don't think they need that top 15, top even 25 guy to solidify themselves as a real threat to come out of the East.
No, and honestly, I think that not looking at a so-called whale actually might be the way to go, to my earlier point of it needing to be a perfect fit with Jimmy, because if it's not a guy who's coming in and it's not a superstar, that is easier to work around. I also think that, and to your point, there's not science behind it, but it is a thing that they turn it on. And I think that finding a guy who's hungry enough to do that with them at that time, regardless of, how impossible it might seem, I actually think that's more important than going after some big whale who, might be chasing another ring or might just want to be change of scenery. To me, finding guys, even if they're not as good on paper, that are hungrier is going to be more of a difference maker.
I think, insofar as you care, 2 of the most Heat players possible that could theoretically come on the market that are not like caps lock superstars would be OG Anunoby is one. I think they probably need more dribbling than someone like him, but OG Anunoby one. And then I'm less confident in him becoming available, but Mikal Bridges might be one of the most Miami Heat players. Like, he played 83 of 82 regular season games last year. Like, that's like a kind of a Miami Heat culture stat, even though they don't care about that.
I would love him on this team. I think the fit would be great. I think he has already proven himself to be someone who will do whatever it takes to get the job done. So yeah, I would love that. It'd be curious to see A, if he becomes available, but B, what it would take to get him.
We're at a banner pace for this podcast because Hardwood Knocks is perpetually slow. Are you ready to enter the cookie cutter portion of the look ahead?
Sure. Why not?
Are there any other strengths or weaknesses about this team that are flying under the radar that we haven't talked about yet?
I mean, again, it's just personal bias, but I really don't think that people are excited enough about Josh Richardson coming back. And I say that mostly for the energy that he brings, for the chemistry that he brings. I think there's something to be said for the familiarity. And, I know there were some people who got kind of excited, but overall, I just don't think that that's being talked enough about. And I'm really excited for him to kind of go out there and prove that, he was worth bringing back and that he was kind of that missing link.
Yeah, to get him on the minimum was just still wild to me. I don't think nearly enough was made of that. Looking to the top 10 in the rotation, let's begin with so what do you expect the most leaned upon starting 5 to be for this team, to break it down from there?
Honestly, I have to pull up your sheet here because, I mean, I think what you have, so what, Kyle, Tyler, Josh, Jimmy, Bam, although I wonder if Caleb will get a start just because of what he did in the playoffs for them and because of the fact that I think he's a little bit more solid in terms of like physically than Josh. So I am curious to see if maybe that will be a call or if it'll be something that perhaps they just switch off depending on, how many games have been played or who they're playing against.
The thing would be my concern is that if you're going to put him in the starting 5, I would almost want to see Kyle come off the bench. I would say Tyler too, but I don't think they're paying him to come off the bench just because I would like to have for them more playmaking coming off this. And if you have Caleb Kyle, Tyler Herro, and Jimmy Butler, and Bam Adebayo. That's your 4 best playmakers on the team at this point. And so I wonder what that would do to, you can stagger, but it just feels like I'd like to have one playmaker on the bench. Caleb Martin is a better player than Josh Richardson. And I mean, at this point, Kyle Lowry as well. So how would you, so Caleb will be like the 6th lock in the rotation. Then how do we flesh it out after that? It feels like K Love would also be a lock, which would be 7. Duncan Robinson, I feel like it's a lock. And so that's 8. And then I kind of guessed at the final 2. Who would you put into those final 2 slots?
Yeah, I mean, I think Bryant for sure, and then Triple J, I would be shocked if not. But again, I think that with someone that fresh, Spo might give him a little bit of a longer leash at first, but if it's not panning out, I do think that that's something to keep an eye on.
Let's fast forward to the end of this season and we look back, I know that they're a team that might cater to matchups more than most, but what do you think will wind up being their most leaned upon closing 5-man unit?
Well, definitely Jimmy and Bam would be out there. I think Kyle, just for the sake of the fact that he's a vet and also just his basketball IQ is bar none. You have to have Tyler out there, right? I mean, it might be the same as the starting 5, honestly.
Well, I mean, that's not like, that can totally happen. I would wonder, I think I probably have Caleb over Richardson or Kyle Lowry. I love Kyle Lowry. Just for the offensive purposes, I think there's a chance that he gives you more optionality than Josh Richardson. I don't know about it. Depends on the night for Kyle Lowry, but I do think that if I were coaching the team, he'd probably be a closing time staple for me this year.
Yeah, I think that what you said about, kind of the opponent being a big thing for this team. I've literally beaten this to the ground. Every year I say the same thing. It really is. We're different depending on who we play. And that's not to say that we're the only team, but I feel like us more than anyone else, which on the one hand, again, can be frustrating because you don't know what you're going to get. But on the other hand, it does kind of let you use more of your roster. And I think in doing that, it makes guys stay ready and kind of be mentally prepared for anything and to jump in at any time. So, I mean, again, I think that at this point, I'm just leaning into the inconsistency because it is what it is. And we might as well enjoy it at this point.
Is there a weirdo, quirky, they probably won't try it, but they should try it lineup you would like to see the Heat roll out?
I don't know. I mean, I was thinking of what happens if Bam and Bryant are on the floor at the same time. I think that it would probably be very short-lived within one game, but I don't see why we would not at least try that. It definitely in the past has not been Spo's go-to to have 2 big guys on the floor at the same time. And I know we've been calling for that for years. But just with the type of players they are and how young they are, I don't know. I think it might be fun to see.
Mine would be, and I might be overcompensating because of my lack of commitment to weirdo small ball lineups this year and other look-aheads, but give me Jaime Jacquez, Jimmy, Josh Richardson, Caleb Martin, and then I don't really care who the 5th is, but it's between Kyle Lowry or Tyler Herro. If you're worried about the defensive end, Lowry, but if you want someone else who can pass, dribble, and shoot at the same time, a 3rd player in there, I would go with Tyler Herro for sure. I don't know that Jimmy defends up sometimes. I think Jaime Jacquez can do it. Josh Richardson, we know, can do it. Caleb Martin can do it. I don't know that you want any of those. I mean, you don't want any of those guys tussling with conventional bigs, but I'm a sucker for small ball lineups, and some of the league's teams have trended so big with size and skill, for sure. Size and skill are important, that I felt obligated to roll out one of my trademark small ball lineups. And so I'd like to see that, even though I don't think we will.
I really like that in a vacuum, but it's terrifying to think of it in actuality against basically any team right now in the league because of how big, to your point, everyone is going.
Our collective schedules, yours and mine this season, had off season this year, much mirrored the Heat's off season in that it was all over the place. And so the over-under has changed since I sent it to you. They have settled in as of October 16th, since I don't know when I'm publishing this, at 44.5. Would you take the over or the under on that?
I'm just going to go over just to be that girl because Heat Twitter hates when I do this. So just to piss everyone off, why not?
You want to go under? They want to be like a 43. Why would they be mad that you go over?
Because I feel like the whole identity behind Heat Twitter at this point is just being a bunch of cranky old men who don't believe in succeeding, and we may as well it's almost like they want to fail so that they can be right, that like this team can't do anything without a Dame or without a Beal. Whereas I'm all in on the team regardless of who's on it, honestly.
I respect that. I guess so. Is that really this? You're more plugged into it than I am. I'm generally asking. Is that the actual sentiment? Because there looked like, and I'm hoping you agree, but there looked like there was way too much water carrying going on behalf of the Heat organization in the Lillard. Like, to call it deplorable that they traded Damian Lillard somewhere else. So I'm just like, do those same people really want the Heat to?
Well, I think that and see, this is where I turned to the Dame situation. I think was the first time that everyone, or that I've seen in quite some time, that everyone kind of got on the same page and really thought it was going to happen, me included. And so I think that when it didn't, the consensus then was kind of to rally together. And I can't remember who tweeted it, but someone was like, it's so Heat Twitter that like losing Dame is the only time we've ever been on the same page in like the last like decade, because otherwise everyone's just at each other's throats. But I mean, I don't think it was great the way that all that went down. And honestly, I would not be mad if like the front office just never dealt with Portland again, just out of principle.
So where do you think their ceiling is regular season in the Eastern Conference? I guess the best way to answer that might be, what would be the teams right now, end of the regular season, you're prepared to guarantee will have a better record than the Heat? Not necessarily championship chances. We've seen that story before where the Heat are just going to come out of the play-in and make the finals, apparently, after almost losing in the play-in, mind you. So how many teams would you be prepared to guarantee will be better than the Heat in the East this season?
I mean, the Bucks will be.
I think Boston's still there, even though I just don't, they make me nervous, like, for themselves. I don't love that team, but I think
agreed. That was the only other one that I was like, I think this would be a lock. But honestly, I don't know. They're kind of losing the grip on their own identity, to be honest. But I'll put them up there. I'll put the Bucks and the Celtics.
I think, and it's not specific to the Heat. I just think that they're a clear top 3 in the East because of what is going on in Philadelphia now. The Cavs to me belong up there because they care about the regular season and they slaughtered like bad opponents last year. They have the best record against teams under 500. And I think they just added Max Strus, and Mobley and Garland will get better. I think that they're a team, regardless of how you feel about them in the postseason, there might still be holes. I think they're going to be an exceptional to spectacular regular season team.
I just don't have trust in them. I don't know what it is. It's maybe I'm just overlooking them and I don't watch them enough. It's just kind of like, yeah, there's glimpses, but it's kind of like longevity wise. I don't know. I just don't see it.
Do you think that the Heat then are going to be back in play-in territory, or that this is a top 6 year for them?
No, I would say it's a top 6 year. I think that they hopefully learned their lesson. And again, I do think some of it was just injuries that were unavoidable. But I think hopefully they've learned their lesson, that there is a middle ground between kind of not going to the next level of play into the playoffs and also almost not getting to the playoffs. I think that they kind of gambled with themselves a little bit there. So no, I don't see that happening again.
I have a bonus question for you that wasn't in the outline. What's more likely? Pat Riley is going within the next 2 years. Pat Riley is going to leave the front office, and we're talking about the Heat having a new head coach because Spoelstra transitioned in the front office, or Spo signs the highest NBA coaching extension in league history.
That one. Riley is not getting ready to retire.
I don't know. I might take the first option. I might think that it feels more likely. Maybe the Spo going into the front office might be too spicy, but part of me feels like I'd be a little surprised if Pat Riley was still around over the next couple years. And maybe that's counterintuitive to, hey, him and Andy Ellsberg didn't go and like make sure they got Dame or try to get involved in the Beal sweepstakes. So perhaps they're playing a longer game than we think. I'm looking at his age. I'm not trying to be an ageist. Pat Riley's done a great job in Miami for the most part. I'm just like, that dude's got to be like a little tired. And I just feel like
I don't know. I think that Jimmy's kind of like just gotten him a new love for everything. Obviously, he's been committed for however long, but I just think he's kind of like just shaken him up. And I think as long as Jimmy sticks around, which I do believe he won't, I think Jimmy will end his career in Miami. I think Pat is along for the ride. His wife, from what I understand, has been trying to get him to retire for however many years. And I just don't see that all of a sudden he's like, nah, now's the time.
I will say then, if and when Spo signs his next contract, I need the number on it. Like, because the coaching figure numbers are finicky unless they're like in the Monty Williams' case, where it's the Pistons basically forced him to give up his gap year because he didn't want to come out. And they're like, no, here's so much money. Then we see Pop getting his extension because the coaching market was reset. I just want to know the number when Spo signs his. I want to know what the number winds up being. Like, is it 20 million a year at that point? I feel like it could be.
I don't even know what contract he's on right now.
I don't know his number right now. I thought I think someone told me, and I don't want to misquote this, that he is coming up on like the end of it, but I might be wrong.
Okay.
It also doesn't matter because he could be in year 2 of a year 5, and teams can like if the coaching market was reset because of Monty Williams, and then Pop gets one. Like Spo's no worse. I don't want to go through coaching. He's no worse than like the 3rd or 5th best coach.
Yeah, absolutely not.
He's probably the best coach in the league, but just to account for some like wiggle room there. Is there anyone else I have not asked you about pertaining to this team you think we need to discuss?
No, I think that, it's still early in the preseason, but I said this earlier, I think that regardless of what happens this season, and I know this is not necessarily what Heat fans want, this team will be fun. Like, I feel like we're all going to have a blast this season. Obviously, I hope that comes with a lot of wins and maybe a move or two at the trade deadline to get us in a better place, heading into the postseason. But I just this team is fun, and I'll take it.
You don't think like there could be some, I don't want to call it negativity, but they just made it to the finals. There will be lumbering those expectations. You miss on Lillard and you missed on, the Donovan Mitchell pursuit, even though they weren't heavily involved in that a couple summers ago. You don't think like what makes you believe that it's just going to be fun? Like, you don't think the pressure is going to get to them? Like, are they somehow more validated because they made it to the finals and I'm viewing it differently than it actually is on the ground? I
just think that this group, and obviously this is not to say every single person, we saw that Duncan struggled when kind of his name was coming up and stuff. I don't think they care. I mean, how can you care when Jimmy is going around spending his time, with soccer stars and playing tennis, and he cares more about his coffee business? It's just, to me, between Jimmy and Kyle, and honestly, I feel like Tyler's pretty unshaken too. I just think that they're going to go out there. They know what they're worth. They know what they're made of. They're going to work hard for sure. I'm not trying to say otherwise. I just think that this season is going to be very enjoyable to watch. And I think, honestly, it kind of helps that the national media just doesn't care at all. They don't care to talk about them.
Like, I find the Heat polarized. Not me saying I'm national media, but like, do you really think that there's like a dearth of coverage for Miami when it comes to the national perspective?
We weren't spoken about literally at all. I mean, we were doing the unthinkable, and every night on loop, it's mostly ESPN, but a little bit of TNT and whoever else as well. It was just Lakers on loop, Denver. I mean, we just aren't talked about. And I think that the team no longer feels like they're being shaded necessarily, or that's to their demise. I think they're like, you're not talking about us. We're just going to go and do this and show you what we're made of. And once it comes to, and we kind of force your hand to talk about us, then you'll pay attention. But no, I think the national media, I think part of it is the fact that the Heat are so tight-lipped that they don't really give anyone much. And I'm sure that gets frustrating to deal with. But I think it's great. And I think that they're all kind of playing into this underdog, underrated persona where they're just going to put their heads down, work, have fun while doing it, and then we'll see you again in the finals.
Well, look, Jimmy Butler gained some of my respect over the offseason because I found out he listens to Hot Mulligan, and so hats off to Jimmy Butler for that. Allana, are you able to tell our listeners where they can find you on social media?
Absolutely. Allana Tachauer, ALLANA TACHAUER on Twitter and Instagram. And maybe I'll come out of retirement again. We'll see.
Yeah, please do. Now that I know you're in retirement, don't be surprised if I pester you at some point during the middle of the regular season to try and get you to come out of it.
I will be here.
Thank you so much, as always, for doing this.
Thank you.